Thank you, Asti, and a very warm welcome to everybody in Indonesia, and I believe we have some from the UK as well. As Asti says, I am the current chairman of the British Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia, and I also sit on the APAC board for Page Group, which is a UK executive recruitment business with around 60 people sat in Jakarta, recruiting across industry, mainly at mid-management to senior level. With both of those hats I wear, I tend to get asked two questions, mainly one around vaccination programs, and the other is around the Omnibus Law. So today we are taking that subject, and from people we speak to, but in both the chamber and across the Michael Page client base, there's early days, but the initial reaction has certainly been one of positivity, and it has certainly been welcomed. When we talk to foreign investors, the perception is it's a step in the right direction. As with all new legislation, it takes time to bed in and requires strong communication around that as well. And hopefully this webinar plays a small part in helping explain some of the sort of the rationale behind it, and also the expectations attached to that. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest speaker, Ibu Shinta Kamdani, who is the Vice Chairwoman at KADIN, and whose team has been very much a central part of putting the Omnibus Law together. So she is certainly best placed to speak with assurance around this topic. Bu Shinta and her team also work very closely with the British Chamber on a variety of subjects around promoting trade between the UK and Indonesia. Bu Shinta also sits on multiple executive boards, is a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion, and was also chosen as one of 30 corporate leaders to join the Global Investors for Sustainable Development Programme. Bu Shinta is joined by two of our expert panelists today. Firstly, Pak Kurniawan, who is the legal service partner at Grant Thornton. Warm welcome, Pak, and he comes with extensive experience with clients across industry, especially around business setup, restructuring, M&A, and I'm told by many sources that he's the leading expert on tax and the legal system in Indonesia, which is no mean feat. And also by somebody I know personally and through business, Pak Sumit Dutta, who is the founder and CEO of ASEAN Business Partners, a business which is very much set up to consult and execute around market access across the region. Prior to that, Sumit was worked for HSBC for 26 years around the world, and was the head of the bank in Indonesia, I believe, from 2014 to 2019. And certainly from the chamber, he was and still is our very much go-to person for economic outlooks for Indonesia. So very warm welcome to both gentlemen alongside Ibu Shinta. I'll be in big trouble if I don't do this, so a very big thank you also to our sponsors, ASEAN Business Partners, so Sumit, thank you, Colliers Indonesia, 57 Promenade, the JARB Integrated Industrial and Ports Estate, and PT Kelly's Express. So thank you all. The running order today, Ibu Shinta, I will invite shortly to present her remarks around the Omnibus Law, and that will then be followed by views and comments from both Kurniawan and Sumit, and we'll end up with a Q&A. If you have got any questions, please do put them in the chat box, and I'll do my best to get through as many as we can in the time available. Our aim to keep it to around an hour if we can, and it's a big subject to cover in an hour, so we'll see how we go. Without further ado, a very warm welcome and thank you for giving us your time, Ibu Shinta, and I shall hand over to yourself.
Thank you, Ollie. I think we should just get straight to the point. We have like 50 minutes left for this session, so I'm going to just start it off with your topic on expectation versus realities on Omnibus. It's been quite a roller coaster journey for the government to complete the Omnibus, and until today, actually, there's still some implementation agreement that's still being worked on. So I want to start with the expectations from the business side. Of course, I'm wearing my hat as from the business. So as you know, on Omnibus, on Indonesia has been facing challenges on hyper regulations and bureaucracy. I think prior to the Omnibus, government stated that we have about 8,848 central government regulation and 14,000 over ministerial regulation and 15,900 local government regulation. So this is all become challenge for Indonesia, especially because a lot of these are overlap between the central and the local government, and also creating a very massive uncertainty in doing business, bottlenecking in investment and weigh down business productivity, as well as effort to achieve a more higher economic efficiency. So Indonesia's worker absorption, I think, needs to be highlighted because before in 2013, we have every 1 trillion investment. We have about 4,595 workers absorption. But in 2019, every 1 trillion can only absorb about 1,277 workers. This is really bad news for us since we are demanded to create at least 2 million jobs per annum to service our demographic bonus in 2030. So this investment data also shows that Indonesia economy is slowly but surely in transition to the Industry 4.0 and automation, and requires a completely different set of labor market dynamics that cannot be entertained in the previous labor law number 13, 2013, which was made over the mindset of more long-term work service. Nature of the work in Industry 4.0 demands also a higher flexibility to workers' mobility and centralized on dynamic skill set rather than the long-term work service. So prior to this, I think Indonesia do not have any clear industrialization policy, which also lower Indonesian capability to recover faster from the pandemic, as we are more a consumption-based economy. So we also have issue on stagnation in the business competitiveness. As you know, although we have slightly improved in our ease of doing business since 27, but in fact, in starting a business, we have Indonesia ranked on static efficiency is still within the best 100 countries in the world. I think it was ranked 140 out of 169. So on starting a business is still an issue. And then also business complexity index, I think issued in January 2020, also ranked Indonesia as the #1 country in which doing business is extraordinarily complex. Also in global competitiveness index, I think we are down in 2019 5 ranks compared to 2018, and also the World Bank report in September 2019. So Indonesia, that no investment we are able to track due to trade war. I mean, all these things, I think you know the story. And of course, our neighboring countries, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand, has been able to get the investment diversion and both trade and investment diversion. So these are some of the issues, and that's why I think business has a very clear expectation why this becomes very, very important for Indonesia to do its major structural reform. And we have to open our hat for this government that they're able to do this and rectify by the legislation. So where are we now with the omnibus? I think at the moment that we are working on the implementing regulations. As you know, the government has completed 51 implementing regulation consisting of the 47 government and 4 presidential regulation. Now, this is grouped into 11 clusters: spatial, land rights, environment, construction, housing, cooperative and SMEs, investment, fiscal, employment, economic zone, government goods, services, licensing, and sector business activities. So there are 11 clusters. And where are we now? So as the implementing regulation on PP and PEPRES are out, now some of the technical ministry are preparing what we call the ministerial decrees or the guidelines on the implementing regulation, and that takes they're given time about 2 months period for this. since the ratification of the PEPRAS and PP. Of course, on preparing this, they are also doing public communication, consultation with all the different stakeholders, including us in the business side. And the most important, which I will touch upon later, is of course integration to the OSS system, the one single submission, and this will be ready according to government in operation by July 2021. And they are now preparing the network tools and all so forth for this implementation of the PP number 5, which is the OSS. And of course, the human resources training and so forth. Now, what's actually the government support in the job creation law? I just want to highlight a few things. Of course, support for the MSMEs, since now the business license is through registration only for the MSME, and also supporting on cooperatives, business in established cooperative, or we call kooperasi, which can share also, to take advantage of technology and so forth. On the continue of the community plantation in the forest area, the community is given permission legally for the use of land sustainability in forest area, and also better policy on integration between obtaining business license and environmental impact assessment. I will also touch on that later. For halal certification, the government bears the cost of certification for the MSME, and acceleration certain in the halal certification process now is expanded. So the halal inspection agency before was only through one agency, and now any Islamic organization and state university can be part of it. For fishermen, previously the fishing boat license had to go through several agencies. Now it's just integrated Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fishery. In the provision of housing, the back of community housing and the constitution of houses for low-income communities will be also accelerated. The land bank will be carried on, agrarian reform and land redistribution to the community. Also, business and MSME will receive benefits such as ease and certainty in obtaining business licensing through the risk-based licensing approach, and the proper rights on protection of worker and laborers. I will also touch into this later. Also, incentive for investment, fiscal incentive, and convenience in certainty of services for investment, wider space of business activities. I will touch all this in greater detail later. And regarding the imposition of sanction and administration violation, I think it's now very, very clear what we call the consistency following the safety, security, environment are subject to criminal sanction, but the rest is administrative sanction. Now, on the market access, definitely this law provides a greater market access for investors, especially foreign investors. As you know, before we have the negative investment list, and now we have what we call the priority list. Now, the priority list consists of 246 priority business fields, and also 90 areas that are reserved for SMEs and a partnership with SMEs, and only 46 business fields that have specific requirements. So compared to the previous one, we have about 515 that are regulated. So now we have more than 1,700 open fields for business. This is a major also step forward for our government. And the priority business field, I think criteria include some of our capital and labor intensive, technology, pioneer industry, export oriented manufacturing businesses, and orientation to research and development. This is included in 246. And incentive also provided tax allowance, tax holiday, also on custom and excise incentive, as well as non-fiscal incentive. So this is all now already rolled out in the implementing regulation. I think it's also noted to understand that the direction, obviously, for Indonesia is really to push and attract investment, especially those that carry through in the 246 priority sectors. Now, I wanted to share with you about the risk-based analysis or business licensing. I think this is really one of the most important part of the Omnibus, which is Government Regulation Number 5, 2021. This is really a big reform from the license-based approach to the risk-based approach. And it's really the purpose is to create a more effective and simpler business licensing issuance and integrated the supervision of business activities that is more transparent, structured, and accountable. So we have 4 stages. So there's low risk. The low risk is low risk businesses will just need to have the business identification number. And the medium low risk will have what we call the standard certification, but it's self-declared. The medium high risk will need the business identification number and standard certification, and it needs to be verified. And the high risk is the business identification number with a permit. So the high risk is the one that really needs a permit. So all the standard business activities, or we call in Indonesia KADIN, will have each of these risks, and also depend on the size of the business, whether you are small, medium, or large businesses. There are the risk is also identified based on that. So the size of the business and the type of standard business activities. So that's going to be all. Every KADIN will have its risk rating. And on the reality side, reality checklist, the biggest challenge is right now is the harmonization between the different technical ministry, because before, as you know, each ministry has their own technical licensing, and this is now all going to be harmonized and integrated into the OSS. So this is why there's a lot of harmonization process that's conducted throughout this time, is to have alignment between the different technical ministry to have the same standard of level of risk base. So this is the process that it takes some time, and the most complicated one. So the term of supervision in the RBI also is, I think, very clear. So it's not that you just identify, self-assess and do whatever you want. There is a supervision. And it's also definitely to ensure the compliance of business activities to be applicable according to the business standard. And I think also it's very clear, if you are not following that, anytime the license can be terminated. So this is I think the supervision aspect is key to this whole risk-based licensing. Now, we also have the centralized and uniform and business-friendly investment service at the national and subnational level. This is Government Regulation Number 6. As you know, we have been using at the moment OSS, but the regional or local government licensing cannot be integrated. So this is why with the Omnibus now, the PPP reduced the local government authority in creating its own investment regime, which often become a source of business uncertainty and investment realization bottlenecking in Indonesia. The regulation makes specific emphasize that all business permits at local level should adhere to the national risk-based assessment licensing and alignment integration to the OSS. Section to each violating local government leaders, whether that's government or regions of Bupati Camat, will be given by Minister of Home Affairs. And the most severe form of administrative sanction contemplated in this PP is total revocation and transfer of local government authority on business licensing affairs to Minister of Home Affairs. Beyond this, the regulation also regulates procedure on investment services, its management and handling, including when or if there are glitch or technical disruption to the OSS requirements, the system connectivity at the local level, and a standard office requirement for the PTSP procedure on monitoring and evaluation to the performance, vertical and horizontal work coordination, and human resource procurement to ensure prompt and satisfactory services. So this is really, I think, also a major breakthrough between the central and the local government. Now, I just want to just touch a little bit on cutting bureaucracy uncertainty through the OSS. So with the new kind of 2.0 OSS, all these different sectors will be all integrated, and I think this is going to be, if implemented properly, and yet to be seen in July, this is going to be a major significant progress for Indonesia, because everything will be done online, electronically. Of course, there are still some commercial licensing in the technical level, but at least the majority of licensing will be all integrated here. And also, if we see, this is also will lessen the corruption, because the physical meeting will be lessened. It's all will be done electronically, and I think this is very, very important. I just want to touch a little bit that we now have the sovereign wealth fund. Maybe I'm not going to talk too much, but just you know, this is also the purpose of Indonesia to set up its own sovereign wealth fund funding, especially for the infrastructure projects. And although primarily it comes from the state-owned enterprises, but private projects can also be included. And I think they are already starting to push with a very, very strong governance. If you know, the authority consists of people that are very high professional, and they said they're going to follow the Santiago principle. So good for them. I also want to touch on the manpower side of the omnibus. Of course, this has created a lot of you know, I think from the, especially from the labor union, when we talk about some of the criticism has been coming more on the manpower side. And actually, the whole process, I wanted to just explain a little bit on the process. Actually, the tripartite process between the government, the business, and the labor union has gone throughout the whole process. So from the law itself, going to the implementing regulation and so forth, has always go through the tripartite dialogue. However, of course, it's not a perfect document, definitely, it's far from perfect. And not just from the labor union, of course, business also cannot get everything that they want. But this is really the problem that creates a lot of miscommunication and misperception, especially from the labor unions, because of course they cannot get everything what they want. And I think this is the key that we need to pay attention to. But I want to just touch some of the things, because this is going to be very major reform for Indonesian manpower. On the certainty of the foreign workers on work permit and its extension, we now have the different kinds for temporary work. For example, we give for audits, inspection, quality controls, and so forth, maximum of 6 months, and cannot be extended. And then for works of more than 6 months to maximum of 2 years, can be extended for 2 years. This is for work. And for special economic zone, a maximum of 5 years that can be extended for 5 years. For director and commissioner is given only once and is valid during the tenure. And the ratification of RTKA is excluded. This is also a major push for directors or commissioner with certain share ownership and foreign workers required for the activities such as production of interrupted due to the emergency, vocational studies, technology startups, business visit, and research for a certain period of time. So they no longer need to have ratification of RTKA. This is kind of the procedure. I'm not going to go through detail, but for you to understand this simplified procedure for foreign workers, from the submission, sending data, payment, ratification, and submission of FITAS and ITAS. So this is the process and the output that you will get from the foreign workers permit. Next. And workers group complaints, maybe I will just touch a few things what they are complaining about. Of course, implementation of the conditional minimum wage, because the sectoral minimum wage is deleted now. So the second is a lower severance pay, because Indonesia has, as you know, is the highest, one of the highest in the world as far as severance pay. And we have PKWT. They said there is not enough proper workers, which is not true. I will go through that a little bit later. And also lifetime outsourcing policy. I think the whole mechanism is changed. So this is not true that there's a lifetime, but I will touch on that a little bit also. And then working hours, we are changing the whole mechanism, but it's not exploitative, more addressing some of the hourly workers and so forth. And then refusing reduction to various types of paid leave, which is also not true. We still have the maternity leave, we still have other leaves. And then also demanding pension and health insurance, which actually they're getting at the end. So the policy on omnibus on wages promotes compliance, certainty, and balance to right and obligation. And the wage policy, I'm not going to go through detail, but I think if you see in our next slide, it's the minimum wage is determined by government and can consist of the first minimum wage or adjusted minimum wage. Of course, all of us will look at the adjusted, because all minimum wage are on most every region have minimum wage. So the adjusted minimum wage in the existing one is based on variable economic growth and inflation, the existing PP 78. After the omnibus, now what's implemented is the adjusted minimum wage. The increase on the yearly minimum wage is calculated based on the variable of economic growth or inflation in the region concerned, whichever is higher. So that's quite a major change. And the data on economic growth, inflation, and purchasing power, and so forth are sourced from the authorized institution in the field of statistics, so BPS basically. And on the provincial level, I think certain requirements also determine the regency minimum wage, but they has to be followed on the average the last 3 years, and the value of economic growth minus inflation in the regency and so forth. So I'm not going to go through detail here, but definitely this is a much more competitive minimum wage formulation and certainty in comparative to the previous one. And also improve distributed worker protections on termination. I think although there is quite a reduction before and after in terms of the severance pay, but also now is, I think, fair, because the severance pay depends also in terms of the reason of the termination. So it's really go through detail all the reason of the termination. And all this now, the most important is on the when they get the severance pay, they also get what we call the unemployment benefit, which include cash allowance, training, and access to the job market. So that's the job protection is definitely there and much more. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly in terms of next on the protection. It provides for protection for contract and outsourced workers as well. So this is clarifying that the contract and outsourced worker has to get the same protection as the permanent employee. I think the most important that you should know about this is that now, of course, the contract workers, the time of the contract workers has been extended. So now you can do 5 + 5. So you can go up to 10 years, and depends on the completion of the job. So you know, this is something that's quite a breakthrough, because before the contract workers limiting in each extension of contract. But on the other hand, the workers will get compensation for each of the completion of the contract. So each year they will get 1 month compensation. So that's actually a very added benefit for the workers. So these are some of the worker protections that being expanded as well. JKP I already mentioned before, and then the social insurance, PPGS. I think the advantage is of course what I mentioned before to you. So this is the GKP now, and also Omnibus regulates extension on standard working hours. Before it's 7 hours a day and 40 hours a week. Now, and then 8 hours a day and 40 hours for 5 working days. But we are also now giving for those that less than standard working hours is allowed now for completion of work below 7 hours a day, and implementing the flexible working hours can be done outside the working site and all this. So this is quite a major change as well to accommodate the gig economy. As you know, we need the flexible working hours, hourly working and flexible and so forth. It also guarantees paid leave and time off. This is something that is actually continued to be given to the workers, to the employees. I just want to touch before closing some of the aspects that protects the environment and promote environment standard compliance, because I think there have been many misperception also that Indonesia now are regressing for our environment. So actually, all businesses are subject to environmental standard compliance, and introduction to the 3 types of environmental documents for business depends on environmental risks, analysis of the business activities or RBA, and only business with high prevalence and high impact to environment requires the pre-approved MDEL, and speed up of environmental in testing through national provincial joint task force formation. Also create the technical standards and supervise the environmental standard compliance by business. More holistic approach to environmental standard making in evaluation involving government, business, expert, and local community, which was not the case before. And transparency in environmental evaluation and process through electronic means and involvement of local communities. So actually, in a way, this is quite a significant change in some of these aspects. I think we only heard the bad things. Obviously, some of these good things are not heard yet. But again, overall, I have to say it lies back again in the implementation. If the law would able to be implemented as it's mandated, I think it's a major progress for Indonesia. Our job is right now to ensure the implementation, because as many good policies in Indonesia, implementation has always been the challenge. The next thing also is the government has reassured us that this is a work in progress. In other words, if there still that needs to be changes in order to improve it, we can still do that. So we continue giving feedback to our government on this. At the end of the day, we want this to work so that Indonesia can be more competitive. We can attract more foreign investors, and we can also create more jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Shinta. And as you said at the beginning, there's a lot to cover there, and sort of the implementation is really what it's going to be all about, and the execution around that, as you say. Pat Kurniawan, maybe I could come over to you first for your general thoughts and comments, and then Pat Sumit will move on to you after that.
Okay, thank you. We think what Ibu Shinta has explained is very detailed explanation about how Omnibus Law will change all these many sectors of industries, and basically what will be the deregulation policy of the government. We would say that we actually, as someone who's been very intimate with all the procedures when we help clients throughout all the necessary government licensing procedures, we can say that the Omnibus Law brings very positive impacts towards the government, towards businesses, simply because we have seen some of the impacts that's being introduced again by this Omnibus Law, we have actually seen the impacts by the time, for example, for these 2 years when the government started the online single submission system, how the system actually changed many process. We have seen the changing mindset of the government in various sectors. Just to take a simple example, for example, now for those of us who's been familiar with many of these bureaucracies, for example, if we want to build a building, we are required to obtain certain type of license to build. What is that? I mean, this is basically just exchange of papers. We are not talking about the object yet because the object has not been built. So now the government actually switched their mindset and say that instead of us scrutinizing its application, why don't we create a standard? And then let this be known to everybody and say to everybody that if you want to build a building, you need to follow the standards, because rest assured, once the building is built, we will scrutinize that and we will check whether this building can be used or not. So we think this is a major breakthrough, the changing mindset by the government. So yeah, I think in general, we are really hoping that this Omnibus Law will have significant impacts in many of these government liaising matters between businesses and the government. Yeah.
Thank you. And same over to you, Sumit, and then we have quite a few questions coming through, which we'll get on to post your comments as well.
Thanks, Olly. So look, with Shinta, who's been one of the architects of the entire Omnibus Law, talking to you at length about this, and with Kurniawan, who, as Olly mentioned, is one of the country's leading experts on tax and legal matters, talking to you, I think the pressure's completely off me, because everything that you wanted to know, you've already heard about, right? So this is just amusement time. But look, as Olly mentioned, for 6 years, I was the CEO for HSBC in Indonesia. Right now, in my current stint, I'm heading up a new company called ASEAN Business Partners. So one common thematic we keep on hearing from investors, right? So ASEAN Business Partners, for those of you who don't know, many of you will not, brings investors from international countries into Indonesia, right? And into other ASEAN markets. But Indonesia is a core focus for us. So we meet a number of different people from Europe, from UK, from the US, who want to come into ASEAN, want to come into Indonesia, but aren't quite prepared to make that final step, right? So, one of the feedback from potential customers, potential investors, the feedback from existing investors in Indonesia has broadly been pretty consistent, right? So I just want to highlight some of the common feedback we've been hearing as to why people don't want to come, or why people are reluctant to come, or why people are not terribly happy having invested in Indonesia. So one of the key issues has been labor, right? And in terms of staff issues, regulations, productivity, ability to hire expats, there's been a ton of issues around this. Now, Shinta has already spelled out in detail what the Omnibus Law is doing to address this, right? Is it 100% complete? Probably not. But by focusing in on staff, by focusing in on terms of the pay which you have to provide in case you retrench staff, etc., there's been significant pushback, and Shinta spoke about what workers are saying, etc. But honestly, our view is that Indonesia is now much more competitive on labor, on staff issues than it was before the Omnibus Law. The second issue, which repeatedly again comes up, right, in terms of land procurement, right? And people sometimes in the past have contrasted, the ability of the Indonesian government to arrange for land for large-scale projects and the time it takes in comparison with other countries. Now, I think there's been a lot of progress again in the Omnibus Law in terms of land procurement. Will this problem completely go away? I don't believe that to be the case, because And I think this is part and inherent of Indonesia's structure as a democracy, right? If you are in a regime where you can, with one stroke of your pen, take over land and consign it away from a private individual into state property, as some countries can do, then it's much easier to make this happen. In a democracy, it is much more difficult. There's a lot of benefits of being in a democracy, but this is one of the areas where I think investors will have to temper the expectations. I think the provisions made are very good in the right direction, but it will not be perfect, right? And there will continue to be issues. The third thing, which again has been addressed both by Bu Shinta as well as by Pak Kurniawan, is the speed of licensing, right? And having this OSS come in, I think will significantly help matters, right? So, one of the key issues, and the reason why the Omnibus Law was created, Bu Shinta touched upon it, it's to help, the country grow, to increase employment, to help SMEs, to help the overall economy. But also in terms of for people in BritCham, for investors coming in, right? It's about, are we making Indonesia an easier place to do business in? And by tackling these issues head on, I think the government made huge progress. But we'll talk again, and the thematic is expectations versus reality. So we'll touch upon that in a minute. The couple of other things which the government has done, right? Which is, I think they're looking at positioning Indonesia as being a competitive force for investment, right? For international companies, right? So special economic zones, right? When investors come into different countries, whether it's Indonesia or Vietnam or Philippines or Thailand, they want to see what are the incentives being given, right? I think in terms of outlining special economic zones and what investors can get, I think they've put a lot of stuff into black and white, which gives a lot of comfort to potential investors. Tax issues, I would love for corporate income tax to have come down even further, but there has been a reduction, and that is welcomed very gratefully. Having said that, and I'm sure Pak Kurniawan will attest to this, tax remains an issue for many international companies. And the one thing which I will say is, and again, from my previous experience working for HSBC, yes, there have been tons of tax issues. Sometimes we've been frustrated, but when we do get to court, if we have to get to court, very often when we have merit in our tax cases, we've always won. So, I think the tax piece will remain an area of contention. And I do think it's an area which the government needs to continue looking at, but there's been some improvement. I'm very happy to note that now, instead of a negative investment list, there's a positive investment list. Great news, and sometimes the semantics are really important. And I think what they've done in terms of, refining and defining the focus is really good. So now there are only 6 sectors, right? Where foreign investors can't get into stuff like narcotics and gambling and stuff, etc. So no one is going to object to that. So, again, could the government have done more? Absolutely. But you can never please everyone in one stroke. I think what the government has done is pretty good. It's a step in the right direction, and there should be more to come in the future. So, look, overall, right? And again, Bu Shinta touched on the sovereign wealth fund. I think it's a hugely interesting opportunity. I happened to be in Dubai a couple of weeks back, and there's a lot of talk happening in the Middle East about this Indonesian sovereign fund. So, when you look at global investors, right? Lot of investment routes still point to Asia. And within Asia, if you talk of ASEAN, you cannot have a conversation without including Indonesia in it. Indonesia contributes to 35% of ASEAN GDP, 40% of ASEAN population. If the Indonesian sovereign wealth fund is carried out really well, I think it will be a huge positive impetus to the Indonesian economy. Couple of last points, right? Is the Omnibus Law sufficient in itself to make every international investor now form a queue to join Indonesia? I don't think the answer is yes. But I do think it's absolutely a step in the right direction. And, to me, there's an issue of content and the issue of intent, right? So is the content enough? 1,000 pages is enough? Should it have been 2,000 pages? Should it have covered more industries? Should it have covered more laws? Yes, you can always want more. but I think it's been a great start. And it's important to recognize, right, at a point in time last year, when the governments of pretty much most countries were struggling to contain COVID, the Indonesian government had the muscles to actually put through this very comprehensive legislation. Which brings me to the second issue, which is intent, right? It demonstrates to me that the government of Indonesia really wants to rectify the balance and get more foreign investment into the country. Indonesia's ability to attract FDI compared to other ASEAN neighbors has not been good. It should be good. It should be getting in a lot more. This demonstrates to me that yes, there's still stuff the government needs to do, but the government truly wants to make this happen. The second thing, right, implementation. I think this is what it all boils down to, right? There are still a number of people in the ecosystem who are not very happy with the Omnibus Law, who want to revert to the status quo, because reducing competition makes sense for certain key players in certain industries. I think the gates are being thrown wide open. And let's, however, not forget there will be pushback, right? There will be pushback. There will be lobbies which will resist these changes. And you'll take 3 steps forward, maybe you'll take 1 step back. Please recognize that it will not be completely smooth sailing going forward. But to my mind, again, I take hope, I take optimism from the fact that the government at the senior most level want to do the right things and are trying to create an opportunity for investors, domestic and international, to invest more in Indonesia. That's it from me. Over to you, Olly.
Thank you, Sumit, and also to Kurniawan as well. That's a very interesting and very valid points, I think, to back up Shinta's detailed explanation as well. For the final 10 minutes, we'll hand over to some people who have asked some questions. And if my sense of technology is correct, I think first question is from Tony Turner from ASEAN Business Partners. And Tony, if this works, over to you to ask your question, and please let us know who you're directing your question to.
Selamat sore, Olly dan semua. Thank you. I hope you can hear me from Southwest London, and thank you to the panel. My question is, although Indonesian policy towards FDI has significantly improved lately, that's what you've been talking about, distant foreign observers here, across the Atlantic, in the States and elsewhere, they may still perceive a protectionist legacy in Indonesia. So I think the future is looking better, but the past doesn't look any better. How do you update this reputation? It's for anybody, but maybe Bu Shinta from KADIN is best placed to try with that.
Thank you, Tony. Bu Shinta, over to you.
Olly, I can't hear it properly. Did she ask, Tony, did you ask about how we do to get more people there more aware of what's happening here? Is that the question?
Well, yes, Bu, but it's about reputation. The laws change the future now, which is good, but the past legacy, there is this protectionist legacy. So how do you overcome the past in a way as well as the future?
Yeah. And that, I think, goes back to the implementation, right, Tony? Because at the end of the day, we can promote many things. We can, I do socialization like this many times, we can say, yeah, we're ready, we're now changing, we are reforming. But at the end of the day, they want to see, is it actually happening? So I think many investors, I kind of wait and see, is this really happening in Indonesia, this omnibus? So I think it's more a showing the way that yes, investors can come now, and it will be much easier for them to do business in Indonesia. I can give you example, land. You were talking about land. Land acquisition has been a very big issue for a lot of projects in Indonesia. So now government provide actually even free land through the special economic zone in Batam for industrial economic zone. So this kind of things actually they want to show. You get that from Vietnam, we can give you the same thing here in Indonesia. So by doing the actual thing, actual project actually coming in and showing that is actually happening, I think more investors can see, oh, this is the real thing. I completely agree with you, Tony. It's hard when we already have certain reputation and credibility. And believe me, I followed all this FTA negotiation. I mean, we've been trying so much, and we've been signing up with some of this CEPA, as you know, with Australia, with Swiss. We're now negotiating with EU. It shows RCEP is the largest one that we just sign off. I mean, it shows really seriousness that we want to go through also liberalization. But we know in actuality, there is still on the ground a lot of the regulation that seems to be protectionist. For example, on the local content, it's been a big issue. Local content without the readiness of our industry in here and trying to just force local content because we want to reduce import, obviously is not the right way to go. And this creates a perception. So things like this needs to be managed properly, because if not, all the hard work that the government is trying to do to progress and make this reform will not be applicable if we can't manage all these expectations also.
Thank you, Shinta. So proof is in the pudding, so to speak, with a very English expression. Thank you, and thank you, Tony, as well. Over to Tjoetiar, also from ASEAN Business Partners, one of our sponsors. Tjoetiar, over to you to ask your question, and again, please direct it to who you would like to answer.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for the very informative insights from all the panelists. I'm Yeti from ASEAN Business Partners. My question is relating to the questions about attracting smaller foreign investments, like from the Europe. With the issuance of Omnibus Law, how can Indonesia attract inward FDI from smaller, like British companies, below the size of large MNCs and perhaps even the SMEs? And secondly, what particular advice would you offer to a British corporate which is commercially interested to invest or invest more in Indonesia? Maybe this question is to Ibu Shinta, yeah?
Thank you, Jetty. Just quickly for me, and maybe Pak Kurniawan can also step in. I think what's important, to me, especially on the smaller size company, is to find the right local partner. I do believe having a local partner will make a big difference in entering and doing business in Indonesia. And that's why the KADIN has actually what we call the business service desk, who does business matching. So clearly, companies who hasn't been here before, who doesn't know how to do business here, we can assist them, and we can guide them the way on how to find the right proper, whether that's a partner, whether that's working with some of the local government, because as you know, projects are not just many projects are all over in the region. So working with the local government is also very important. So many of these aspects are now we do assist and we do support. So I think through BritCham and KADIN cooperation, we do facilitation for businesses, especially those in the medium and small size businesses. I would also like to touch upon specifically on trade, because we are KADIN will be launching the trading house that will also able to be platform facilitating both sellers and buyers, and we can share more about it, but that's related more on medium enterprises. I think will be a way also on utilizing some of the services that we can give. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Shinta. And Pak Kurniawan, I want to invite you to make any comments on that topic as well.
Okay, so we think, like Ibu Shinta said, of course, KADIN will be able to help whenever there is any need for businesses to enter into the market and want to understand the problems relating to making the entrance into Indonesia. Relating to the omnibus itself, the way we see what the government is trying to make here is basically to to make sure that the system works for everybody. And we think one factor that really underlines this deregulation policy by government is the centralized what we call norms, standards, criteria, and procedures. So logically, once the system works based upon these principles, whoever wants to enter Indonesian market can basically apply for the proper licenses from anywhere and will get the same treatment anywhere. So this is part of the reason how the Omnibus Law, we believe, will basically give equal opportunity to everybody, to every businesses. Of course, one will say, for example, because they may not from the provisions in the Omnibus, how the law actually try to give some sort of priority to micro and small businesses, for example, as opposed to foreign-owned businesses. But this is basically logical, simply because those that are micro and small businesses are the ones that may need more help compared to the big one. But that doesn't mean that our government actually apply discriminatory treatment, because back in 2007, when we have this investment law, it is already stated in the law, clear in black and white, how the government basically apply the non-discriminatory treatment to all businesses. And we can say even until today, whenever there's any tax facility, for example, to the best of our knowledge, we can say most, if not all, of those facilities can be given to businesses that fit certain criteria that is not merely based on the ownership status. So for that reason, we believe that this Omnibus Law, as well as the existing regulations, actually will work towards creating the business environment that is friendly for everyone, that is just and basically fair in all the necessary aspects of their business.
Olly, can I make a quick point, please?
Absolutely.
So, look, again, I think, it's important to recognize there are some countries, all countries today are competing for investment, right? And for FDI. But in some countries, the focus is very much on getting big scale investment, manufacturing investment, infrastructure. I think the Omnibus Law, as I think Kurniawan has mentioned, is very fair. And I think the Indonesian government is, of course, looking for big ticket investment. It's also opening its arms for SME, medium level companies to come into the country, which I think is really encouraging, number one. Number two is, again, I think Jetty made the point, what advice? I would just say for companies wanting to come into Indonesia, Shinta made a really good point, choose a local partner, absolutely. I would just add, also do your homework, do your research. This is a large country, right? 280 million people, fourth most populous in the world. Large country, huge potential, but do your homework before you come into the country. So you come in with your eyes and ears wide open. And my other request would be, sometimes people think, okay, you know what, I can go into a country, make a lot of money, and then 3 years, 5 years later, fold up my operations and come back home. That should not be expectation in Indonesia. This is a country which I would recommend you have a 20, 15-year horizon. Come in here, build your base. It's going to take a little bit of time, but therefore don't have an expectation that you can come into the country, make a lot of money, and then get back again. That would not be what I would recommend to you.
Just a final question for you, Sumit, and then we'll hand over for Shinta for some final comments as well. I've been asked a few times, what do you see the sort of the top 2 or 3 challenges being to implementation, which is obviously something Shinta alluded to as well around, that's the real proof of all this. What do you think that the sort of 2 or 3 main challenges are going to be?
Look, one of the main challenges is what Tony alluded to later, right? In the past, Indonesia has been perceived as being protectionist. And I think those forces are there, right? There are forces who benefit from not having international competition. So I think right now, with the Omnibus Law, the way the government is progressing, there's this constant challenge, right? The government, it wants to be progressive. It wants to open the gates wider open. It wants to bring good quality investment into the country. But there are some forces which are opposing this, right? So to me, this would be a challenge, and this challenge is not going to go away, right? There's going to be, there is a lobby which actually wants to keep most of Indonesian business for itself, which is not very happy with what President Jokowi and what Bu Shinta is trying to do, right? So I think that's something we should keep an eye out for. It is unlikely to be, smooth all the way. There will be pushback. To me, very frankly, I think that's the core challenge, right? Because after that, the country has a lot to offer. This is the one thing which has been kind of holding investment back, as in the perceived welcome for foreign investments coming in. If it will not be fixed overnight, but if the climate becomes more conducive and becomes more welcoming, I think success will breed further success, and more companies will want to come in.
Very good. Thank you, Sumit. And Kurniawan, final comments from you in terms of the implementation and the challenges towards that.
Okay. So, yeah, I think one of the challenges from the government side, from the officials, would be the switching of mindset. Again, from being served to serve the public, from being a punisher and the one who scrutinizes every application in licensing process, for example. Now they are more and more into the supervision works rather than the licensing agent, because what the government is now trying to make is basically a systemized system, a systemized process that will guarantee that everyone, as long as they comply with the norm and standards and procedures and criteria, will get their license. And Ibu Shinta also mentioned earlier how the supervision works in itself is not aimed to basically penalize those that have not yet complied to that. The government is expected to nurture them instead of just giving punishment. So this switching of mindset is really a big task from the government side. We know all this time how the tension and loose connection between central government and regional governments. Now they are trying to basically recreate the power distributions, and they try to create this very strong system where if you submit something and it lapses for a certain time period, you will be granted a license. So that would be one of the biggest challenges, we think, to make sure how this OSS will work, and then how all the government will basically do their functions after that.
Thank you. And just to sort of finish up, Bu Shinta, and partly on that subject that but Sumit and Kurniawan have both alluded to, when do you think the business community will really start to see the impact of the Omnibus Law?
We think soon. Yeah. We think soon. Yeah, because like Ibu Shinta said, and as what the regulation said, this new OSS basically will expect to commence on in this July, right? We will soon see how it would impact the businesses, because as soon as businesses experience smoother, easier process whenever they want to do something, then words will spread, we hope, and hopefully those criticism against Indonesia will be changed over time. Yeah.
And thank you. And Bu Shinta, over to you, similar kind of question to wrap things up. When and how confident are you?
Well, I think, first of all, let it be clear that the purpose of Omnibus is also we need to create jobs. In order to create jobs, we need to attract investment. So at the end of the day, the KPI of the government very clear. They cannot attract investor, then all this whole omnibus will go to the drain, right? So I think this is something that we really follow through, and the government needs our assistance, Olly. I think as BritCham and KADIN, this is what we can help the government also, how to facilitate business and be able to bring investors coming in. So I think this is the work that needs to be done by a lot of the stakeholders. Of course, there will always be people that's against it, but I think in order to make it work, it cannot be the job of the government alone. Very clear. So I think all of us sitting here, all of you in the UK, please help and promote. And at the end of the day, like I said, what's important for the government is to give feedback to them. So whatever happening on the ground, things doesn't work, we have to complain, we have to give the feedback so that there will be improvement that the government can make. Because now it's all the presidential regulation, all the government regulation is all in the executive level. So changes can happen. And this is why it's important that we monitor the implementation on the ground. And KADIN actually is setting up task force. I think I would like to all the foreign chambers, including BritCham, to help us with this, so we can tell the government what didn't work, what works, what didn't work. So I think I want to close with that, and let's work together to ensure that this is not just a piece of document on paper, but it's something that will be useful, and we can, achieve the mandate of getting more investors coming in. Thank you.
Thank you, Shinta, and I 100% agree. The likes of Grant Thornton, ASEAN business partners, the British Chamber are all sort of on the same side on this to help, rather than sort of nitpick, I suppose. And again, thank you for your time today, because I think a big part of this is the communication and opening up those channels for feedback is going to be essential. So thank you to Pak Kurniawan, to Sumit as well. Thank you, gentlemen. Very insightful. Shinta, again, thank you for the time, and we will forward this presentation that Shinta gave onto everybody who's attended today. We've been asked a few times whether we will. Yes, we will. To our partners, again, ASEAN business partners, thank you. Colliers International, 57 Promenade, the Java Integrated Industrial and Ports Estate, and PT Kelly's Express as well. Thank you all for your support. To the British Chamber team, thank you for the quick turnaround, as always, very professional. And look, I suggest we have a follow-up webinar maybe in 6 or 9 months' time, once things have had a chance to bed down and we get some sort of real-life examples of the impact of it. And Shinta, we'd love to invite you back alongside Kurniawan and Sumit to discuss at that stage as well later in the year. And hopefully by then, vaccination programs and everything else are far more advanced too. But on that note, I wish everybody a very happy Easter and a long weekend ahead. And thank you again for everybody who participated and attended today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Olly.
Thanks all.
Thank you all.